Hello everybody. Let's look at our final project for the year before you work on your final portfolio. The last thing we want to look at is the basics of light. And photography is all about light, but we want to get a little bit more specific because we haven't paid all that much attention to it yet. So let's take a look at some basic light terms so that you start to notice more about the light around you. So when we talk about light, we usually talk about two different types of light. There's soft and hard light, and then within that there's the direction the light is coming from. Is it front light, side light, back light, flat light, where there's really no direction at all? So let's take a look at what all those terms mean so that you can produce some examples of those yourself. So soft and hard light. Soft light is where there's a very smooth gradation from dark shadows to bright light. And hard light is where the shadow goes, it's like shadow, 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 and then it cuts off and then the shadow's gone. So the shadow will have a clean line. That's what it looks like. In this picture here, you can see very soft shadows, like it's a smooth kind of shift from where the shadow of the shed goes into the light on the dock. It's like a gradient. The size of the light source relative to the subject, relative to the camera, and is what determines how hard it is or how soft it is. And it's not the actual size of the light source, but it's how big the light seems. That's a little weird, but if you think about it, the biggest light source that we have is the sun, right? It's huge. But it's also very far away. So to our eyes, it appears like it's about that big, maybe. That's my little, yeah. So it seems like it's small and bright. It gives a very hard light. If you ever look at when you've got direct sunlight, you'll see very clean shadows. Whereas a light source that's close and large will give very soft shadows. So if the sun is shining through a lot of clouds, it becomes diffuse, and then the clouds become the light source, which seem much larger, and you get softer light. You see the same with studio lights. If you look at these two lights here, one is just a standard flash with no kind of modifier on it. That's a very hard light. The shadows are going to be very strong. This one has a great big 5-foot octobox on it, which spreads the light out and makes it one big source and gives you very soft, to my eyes, flattering light. There are different times when you want to use different kinds of light, but it's more forgiving when you've got that soft light. So here's a pretty good example, or here's two pretty good examples of soft versus hard light. The soft light is on the left. Check out her nose. See how it's like a smooth, kind of like where it begins the shadow and where the shadow ends, it fades in. Whereas here, when the light is coming from the same direction and is coming from a small source, looking at this light, the first shot is using this guy, the second shot is using this guy. In that second picture, you can see a very clear shape of her nose in the shadow for the light coming there, and then very clean lines here in the shadows. Whereas here, the shadows kind of blend in, and they blend in around here, and it's a smooth kind of gradation. Whereas here, it's very hard lines, abrupt shifts. It's like shadow going along, and the light comes in.
Let's talk a little bit about how to find soft light and hard light. Right now, I'm in my classroom, and I'm using window light to light my own face. And it's pretty directional, as you can see, because this side is quite a bit darker than this side. But it also should be pretty soft because of where I'm located. So the window is right here, shining. There's no direct sunlight hitting the window, it's all reflected light. And then that reflected light is kind of feathering off, getting even more diffuse coming this way into my face. So this is using that same window, just straight onto my face, which really isn't too bad right now because it's definitely all just reflected light. If there was direct light shining through it, like if you could see the sun out that window, and there was beams of light coming through, that would be probably too harsh to shoot. But this is still pretty soft light. You can see the way it kind of falls off because with reflected light, the farther it has to go, the less light you get. So it's darker behind me than it is in front of me. If you're looking for hard light, use a light bulb. Those are small, and they're going to give you very strong, clear shadows. A lot of times we're talking about lights in the ceiling, and I'm not a huge fan of that because it's top light, which then, I don't know, it's hard and the direction's not super flattering. I don't really like it most of the time. But it's something to experiment with as well. Here I've got just a couple of regular fluorescent bulbs hitting me. So they're fairly small and fairly strong. and they give me that kind of harder light. When you're thinking about light, try not to use mixed light. What I mean by that is I've turned off all the lights in my classroom right now. I'm just illuminated by this window. And that means that the color of the light and the direction of the light is much more controlled. If you've got the window open and you've got ceiling lights that might be different colors, all that's going to mess with your picture a little bit. So try to avoid that if you possibly can.
Now, flat light. Here's an example of flat light, and we're going to go out and take a look at what it looks like outside anyways in a minute. This is flat light, where basically everything's in a shadow, so it's all light. There's no real serious shadows within there because on this picture, it's such an overcast day that the light is just bouncing around everywhere. There's no particular direction to it. It's just lit. It's very easy to shoot in flat light, but it's also sometimes maybe a little bit boring. Let's take a look at what that looks like outside.
Okay, we're talking about flat light now. So I'm showing you an example of flat light. I'm standing in a shadow. That means that any light that's in here is reflected off the ground and all around, and means it has no direction. You can't see me very well right now because I've exposed for all the light, which includes the sky. If we come in and make the shadow our light and just increase our exposure, then we get very even flat light, which can be lovely for portraits and all kinds of things where you don't want a lot of shadows. Now here I am back in the same shadow, slightly different angle, but we're filling the camera with all the shadowed area here. And you can see it's a nice, soft, even light. Wherever I am, I'm pretty well lit. There's not a whole lot of direction to it. There's a tiny bit because you can see there's more of the light reflected kind of coming at me from the side. So I should get a little bit of shaping light there in some of the shadows. Mirror image over there. But for the most part, it's pretty soft, pretty flat.
Okay, front light. Front light is when the light is shining straight into the subject's face. So the photographer has the sun. If you're using the sun, and the sun is the easiest thing to use, so we're going to start playing with the sun for the most part. When you're shooting with front light, that means the light is coming from behind the photographer and shining straight onto the person or subject that they're taking the picture of. And here you can tell this is front lit because you see the shadow is right in the shape of her chin and right in the shape of her nose. It goes right down there. If it was side light, it would go off to the one side or the other. Let's take a look at what front light looks like outside.
Now this last one is front lighting, or axis lighting, you could also call it that. It's very simple. It's the one that my dad always taught me to do first when I was first learning the camera, because you're always going to know that you're getting hit by light. The sun is directly going right into my face. You can see shadows on my face that way, like probably from my nose and stuff. I can't really see right now, but it should be there. So when in doubt, you can always put the sun right behind your camera and face it right into the person. There are some drawbacks to front lighting, particularly with portraits. Right now I'm a little bit blind because the sun's right in my face. It's blocked by a little bit of cloud, but it's still pretty bright.
Now, side light. Side light you can see in these two examples. One side of her face is lit, the other side is not. And then over here, the sun is kind of off in the corner, so it's more like a 3/4. It's between front and side, but it's giving you kind of nice strong shadows going along the composition. The basic idea of side light is that the light is hitting your subject from the side. Remember, with any of these, front light, side light, we're always talking about where the light is in relation to the subject, not to the photographer. So the subject is being hit in the front, that's front light. The subject is being hit from the side, that's side light. Side light can also mean top light, because it's coming from the top side, straight down. We generally don't like that for portraiture and stuff, and in general, we kind of avoid top light most of the time. But there are interesting times when you can play with top light and come up with some pretty cool compositions. Check out some of that Jay Mizell stuff. He does some pretty cool stuff with top light because he still looks at it. So let's take a minute and go outside and look at some side light right in the field.
Now we've got a pretty good example of side lighting. I've just brought the camera around a little bit and stuck it in the road. The sun is over there, shining down on me from the side. And you can see that part of me is lit. This side should be lit pretty well, and this side should be mostly in shadows. And you can also see that along those hills over there, the way that the hills get the shapes, and from the shadows they bring out that texture and the three-dimensionality a little bit better. If it was just flat light, those grassy rolly hills might just kind of blend in a little bit. But with the sun hitting it from the side, that brings out that sense of texture and that sense of shape a little bit better. So that's side lighting.
Okay, now my favorite is backlight, because you can do so much with backlight. In this first one, I exposed for the light hitting the water, and that made everything in between the camera and the light very dark. That's called a silhouette. So you get that kind of rim light there, lighting up the edges of our hair and stuff. And because there's very bright stuff right behind them, then they get that separation and stuff. You get the shapes. It's fun to play with. This one, I exposed for her face, even though she's being hit from behind with the light. So everything behind her is kind of bright, extra bright, and then she's exposed correctly, and it gives actually pretty nice, soft, flat light on her face, but then also these highlights in her hair and stuff, which bring out hair color. Sometimes if you don't have that, then the hair is just kind of this bleh. You can't really tell you see any details. And then this is very low side light, that final one in the corner there. Backlight. Which is lighting up all the little stuff floating around, and it gets that orange kind of glow, and it just gets kind of a magical kind of feel to it. That's why I like backlight a lot of times. So let's go take a look at what backlight looks like outside.
This is backlighting. The sun is directly behind my shoulder right over there, and it's shining down on me as a subject. So let's assume that you're the cameraman or camera person. You're the camera person standing behind the camera. When you're backlighting, you have the light behind the person you're shooting, and it's shining right into the camera. Backlighting is fun because it's very versatile. You can expose for the subject, which we're doing basically right now, where the sky is overexposed and the sun is overexposed, but we're getting decent detail in the shadow area, which is me, because the light is hitting me from behind. But we can also do a silhouette, where you expose for the light itself, and then the subject is just a black, kind of a dark shape. So let's take a look at what that also looks like. And that's me silhouetted by the sky. And you can see the outline of my shape and all that, and it's very clear. You know, if I turn sideways, I've got my profile, and which is, you know, that's what we can do with backlighting. So backlighting is fun. It gives you a lot of possibilities. You can do some very kind of romantic Gone with the Windy kind of stuff, or you can do more what we did in the earlier shot, where you see the highlights kind of lighting up around the edges of something and sort of brightness, and that also looks very cool.
All right, so now we're back. Your job is going to be to create examples of each of these things we just talked about. So the light portfolio assignment in the slideshow that you have in Google Classroom looks like this. You're going to make at least one picture with soft light from any direction, one image with hard light from any direction, one image with side light, one image with axis, that's front light, one image with backlight, and one image with flat light. They should show all this stuff and exemplify elements of composition and techniques studied in our previous units. So you should still think about what the picture is, and think about things like leading lines and balance and all those things that we talked about in the last unit, while simultaneously bringing in that element of light. You're adding one thing on to what we've already done, not just shifting gears and doing something completely new. And you've got a slide for soft light, a slide for hard light, a slide for side light, a slide for axis front light, a slide for backlight, and one for flat light. All you have to do is drag your pictures into those, and also hit add and the files. I'm not making you link a folder this time because there's only like 6 pictures, so you can just add those right to the assignment. Make sure that each JPEG is also labeled front light, side light, that kind of stuff. And that should do it. That's our last assignment before we start working on their final portfolio to turn in at the end of the year. All right, guys, you're photographers. Go out and take some pictures.